Linda Burney is the Shadow Minister for Indigenous Australians and is also my guest this afternoon. Linda Burney, lovely to speak to you.
You too, Patricia.
Is this strategy as ambitious as you were hoping it would be?
I think it's very ambitious in some ways. Of course, there are some targets that are probably not as ambitious as some people would like. And certainly the target around domestic violence, or the lack of a target around domestic violence, I know is a disappointment to some, but I do know that the Minister and the Coalition of Peak Aboriginal Organisations are going to be working on that. I think there is an issue from some organisations about what's not there, but you can't put everything in, and I do feel that and Labor is very committed to the targets as they've been articulated, and importantly, Patricia, the way in which they've been arrived at through a partnership between the government and the peak organisations.
You've talked about the history of failure in Indigenous policy, and I've watched the sort of fanfare and excitement as things are announced, and then no delivery or bad delivery and the same delivery every time. What's required to make sure this doesn't keep happening again? What do you need to do to make sure this doesn't fail?
I think that the point you've just made is absolutely the key one. You and I have been around a while and we've seen things come and go. I've been working in Aboriginal affairs for 39 years and I have seen many initiatives. The difference with this one is that it has been done very much in partnership, and there are accountability measures built in. But what is really concerning for me, Patricia, is that the Prime Minister actually said in his press conference there will not be buckets of money and we'll look at using the money that is already there. Now, what does that mean? It means that there could be the defunding of some organisations to pay for the targets, but there is absolutely no way in my mind that some of these targets will ever be reached, particularly things like housing, if there is not additional resources. And part of the key to this is making sure that Aboriginal community-based organisations are properly resourced so that they can be part of the partnership. And just finally, of course, Patricia, this is not just about the federal government, it's about local government and state government. And there is, in my view, an enormous onus on state governments, particularly with things like incarceration, to completely restructure what they're doing.
Yeah, I think that's right, and I do think that's an important change here, because we know that state and territory governments have a lot of the sort of power over Indigenous Australians as well when it comes to incarcerations, and to not include them was always a bit odd, to be honest. Are you disappointed by the 15% target around incarceration rates? Is that too low, or does it lack ambition?
Well, it's better than what was originally being forecast. The target for adults, as you've indicated, is 15%. I think for juveniles, it's something like 30% by the year 2031. Now that's a decade, and it means that these targets, like the last ones, go over the course of parliaments, which is very, very important. Going directly to your question, Patricia, 15% I think will be a disappointment for some groups. As I said, Labor is committed to the targets that have been arrived at, but I think 15% is a disappointment for some groups for sure.
How about this issue around the age of criminal responsibility? It's the Attorney General's job at a sort of national, federal level. They all met. They squibbed it, really. They kicked the can down the road. The Minister just told me that he doesn't think a 10-year-old should be in detention. I imagine neither do you. Is there a sense of urgency around changing that? It has such an impact, of course, on Aboriginal children. Would that be a game changer?
I think it would be a game changer, and as you've indicated, an enormous number of Aboriginal children are in detention. In fact, Reeby in Campbelltown in Sydney has a 60% Aboriginal population. In some parts of the country, particularly in the north, it is 100% almost of Aboriginal children in juvenile justice, and the implications for that are just horrendous. So I urge the attorneys, and I particularly urge the Federal Attorney General, not to kick the can down the road again and to actually come to terms with the age of criminal responsibility in Australia. When you have a look at like countries across the world, they do not lock up 10-year-olds. But there is also examples, Patricia, that we've got to be very realistic about, where horrendous crimes have been committed by young people, and somehow or other those two dilemmas need to be dealt with, and I think they can be, and I am disappointed that there wasn't more action earlier in the week. Clearly this is not going to go away.
Linda Burney, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, Patricia.
Linda Burney is the Shadow Minister for Indigenous Australians, joining us on these new Closing the Gap targets. There are many of them that have been introduced today, new targets that have been agreed to by state and territory governments with the federal government as well. It's actually quite a big deal because we've been waiting for these to be announced. There's been a lot of argy-bargy and toing and froing about where they'll land. It is a dramatic increase in the number of agreed Close the Gap targets. And the other difference, I think, which is quite key, is that Indigenous people are kind of got a seat on the table in terms of ownership over these and getting to kind of taking responsibility for the outcomes as well. So pretty big changes, incarceration in there, child removal, which was key, suicide. Also, these issues around family violence. These are really key issues that have been not really addressed by the previous targets. So let's see, of course, the fullness of time will show us whether they are able to stick to the agreement they've made today.